two items on our agenda. The first is Expedited Bill 10-25, Personnel and Human Resources, hiring displaced federal workers. Today we will have a work session on that and have a recommendation to go to full council. We do have, this is a bill that was introduced by Council Vice President Jawando, who should be joining us virtually in a bit, but I will turn it over to Ms. Wellens to walk us through the packet. And I know we have folks from our Office of Human Resources and the County Exec's Office, and you all can kind of come up because I'm sure we'll have some questions for you as we're going through this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this mic on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's more, they'll let us know if you're being broadcasted.
It's a seventh floor, nothing ever works.
Right.
This one is. Oh, this one's not. Working.
Okay. Can you hear me on this microphone?
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you.
Should we test on?
Yeah, let's test.
Check, check, test. Can you hear me?
Can you try it again?
Test, test, test.
I can't hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you there.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll let IT know.
And if this doesn't work, we can deal with Verizon.
Can you hear me now?
Great. And we've been joined by Council Vice President Jawando and Ms. Wellens. Before you walk through the packet, I want to return to Council Vice President Jawando if you want to say a few words since this is legislation he introduced. And Council Vice President Jawando, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. If you can turn up, I don't know if that's.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much, and really appreciate the opportunity to participate virtually. We have I have a commencement this morning and a couple other things in Baltimore, so it's for our Go Paint Branch Warriors. So this bill, I really appreciate all the co-sponsors. And we know, unfortunately, the really difficult time that our federal workers and everyone who's connected to federal workers, contractors, family members, the institutions themselves are going through because of this administration, because of the Trump administration and the non-efficiency and just really careless and reckless nature of DOJ and Elon Musk. And we're doing all that we can. I'm really proud to be a part of this council where we really have an all-hands-on-deck approach throughout the county, through the sessions that the council president kicked off, that we did several, and they're still ongoing on trying to get resources and information to folks who have been impacted. This is another, I think, important tool in the toolbox for the near term that will help us address the challenges faced by what I believe to be illegally fired or RIFed federal workers. And so this bill is going to create a definition of a displaced federal worker, which I never, as we were drafting it, I never thought we'd have to do that. So it defines that. We're working in consultation with our Office of Human Resources and the County Executive's Office and with other federal and government employee unions, AFGE, I want to thank them and others. This will allow for the Office of Human Resources to give an expedited review and check-in, and we'll describe obviously the bill through the packet. And there's some amendments since it was introduced that I am in full support of in working with OHR today, or over the last several months, that will allow for fired or RIFed or displaced federal workers to have that are qualified and apply for a county job, to get an intake process, to not move above anyone that's already in our preference order. Veterans and disabled individuals would still be considered first, but they would get screened and vetted, and should they be qualified, be presented on a highly qualified list to the agencies and help speed up that process. We want to send a loud and clear message to our federal workers who have been let go and their families and everyone associated that we value your service, and we want to take advantage of it here in Montgomery County should the position be a good fit. It has a 2-year sunset, and I know they'll walk through the changes we made since introduction. I really appreciate Director Anderson and her team for their work and collaboration on putting this together. So that's the gist of it, and I really appreciate the GO committee letting me join you today to hopefully move this forward, because our federal workers deserve it, and it'll be another tool in the toolbox to help them out. Thank you, Madam President.
Great. Thank you very much, Council Vice President Jawando. And Ms. Willens, with that, we'll walk through the packet.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you to Council Vice President, the lead sponsor, for walking through the parameters of the bill. And we're joined by Dr. Whedon, Deputy Director, Office of Human Resources, Mr. Frashore, Division Chief from OHR, Ms. Swanson, of course, the Director of Strategic Partnerships with the County Executive's Office, and Ms. Jackson from the Office of Management and Budget. And as the Council Vice President explained, there are existing preferences under our merit system law for certain individuals, including existing county employees with disabilities, county employees subject to a RIF or reduction in force, veterans with disabilities, and then there's an equal preference for a veteran without a disability and a non-veteran with a disability. As originally drafted, this bill would add to that bottom equal preference list the displaced federal workers. And the displaced federal workers, again, as originally drafted in the bill, would be individuals who reside in the county, who on or after January 1, 2025, got a notice from the federal government separating them from employment and indicating that their job was no longer needed, or that they were subject to a RIF. And then also the individual would have to demonstrate a loss of income due to the separation from federal employment. One of the amendments that will be before you is to eliminate that last requirement of showing a loss in federal income. I mean, in part due, the Council Vice President can explain the amendment better, but, in part due to, I believe, the administrative burdens of having to show that and having to process that in OHR, and also on the burden on the individual. And then as originally drafted, there would be the bill would sunset 1 year after its effective date. There's also an amendment to extend that a bit and to provide a date certain. And to implement the bill, OHR would be within 60 days of after the expedited effective date. The OHR and the executive would send over to the council some Method 1 regulations. All personnel regs are Method 1, and this would be a personnel regulation. They would send it over to amend the existing regulations that already exist for our current preferences, to add in this new preference, and to kind of explain exactly how it would be carried out administratively. There are several issues for the committee's consideration. The first potential amendment that the Council Vice President worked on with the executive and OHR for your consideration would be a slight modification to the order of the preferences. As I had mentioned, as originally drafted, the displaced federal workers would be on the same par as the not individuals with disabilities or not veterans and veterans. And so this potential amendment before you, this is item 1, page 3 of the staff memorandum, would be to move the displaced federal workers to their own new category that would be lower than the veterans preference. Not to say that the federal workers aren't deserving of a preference, but just that in acknowledgement, the veterans would be a higher preference, and individuals with disabilities. And then the federal workers would be a new category on its own, the next level of preference. Again, that amendment is for you starting on page 3 of the memorandum. There's also in the packet, there is a track changes version of the bill to reflect all of these potential amendments, starting on circle 23, just to kind of keep it straight how they would all look in the context of the full bill. So that would be item number 1, Madam Chair.
Great. Before we get into the different amendments, I just want to see if any of the folks from OHR or OMB who are here wanted to say a few words. I know you've been working on this with the Council Vice President, and we appreciate that work, and just wanted to see if you had any opening comments before we dug into the specifics.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Lolita Weeding, Deputy Director for the Office of Human Resources. On behalf of Director Anderson, I want to thank you, President Stewart, Council Member Katz, Council Member Friedson, for inviting OHR today. I do apologize for
Yeah, we have.
here.
Right.
I do have some water here.
Everybody is sick right
Yeah.
now. I think
Allergies, so I apologize.
version of this cold.
Yes. So I just want to let you know that OHR is continuing to drive improvements in the county's human resources practices by building a strong and resilient workforce. We understand the intent of this bill to support Montgomery County residents, and like our neighboring jurisdictions, the county continues to support federal employees through representation at job fairs and partner with WorkSource Montgomery and other groups to assist with resume building, as well as assisting new candidates to navigate through our new applicant tracking system. And lastly, I would like to add that we have seen an increase in federal application, and OHR alone has not only interviewed, but hired 4 federal employees over the past couple of months. And I'll yield.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's dig into, unless people have opening comments, dig into the specifics. So I think the First Amendment, as Ms. Wellens noted, is on the bottom of page 3, and would have the preferences and have the displaced federal workers in a preference list after the veterans with disability, and that is on page 3 on the top of page 4. Again, I don't know if OHR has anything specific on that amendment. Or Councilmember Katz, yeah, if you have a question.
Yeah. In general, we can get back to that. I have, but when it says resides in the county in the original page 2 of it, if someone moves to the county, they lost their job with the federal government. They lived in Virginia and they decide to find the good life and move to Montgomery County. How does that affect this?
Good morning, Sam Freshour, Division Chief for Policy Practice and Strategic Communications in the Office of Human Resources. That would be part of the document verification requirements that we would be proposing in the draft executive regulations to define what does county residency look like. We would most likely be adopting similar language used in other proof of county residency requirements that the government has. So as far as tenure of their residency, that would need to be analyzed as far as length of tenure, but usually proof of residency is, that electricity bill, tax bill that shows that they were in the county.
Well, so in other words, they could be covered, is what you're saying, right? So, but is it the first day? Is it 60 days? How long would they have to live here in order to be covered?
That would have to be determined in the what types of documents and how soon those documents, but they would have to provide those documents at time of application.
Okay. And the question about the court cases. There's, even if you get a update every 15 minutes, it changes. If a court, does a court case say that they are no longer having a rift if they put a hold on it? How does that work?
So the document verification that we are looking at in this bill, as far as how they are defined as a displaced federal worker, is a notification of actual separation. So they would have to have been permanently separated from the federal agency that they work with. So it's not just a notice that they might be reduced in force, but it is the actual post date, right, that you have been separated as of this date. And for us, it would have to be a date after the time of application, or
Well,
before the time of application.
So doesn't it say on B that it's just a notification from the federal government that their federal position was no longer needed, or that individual is subject to federal reduction in force? So are you saying that if they just received a notice that they wouldn't qualify under this legislation?
Yeah, just, thank you, Councilmember Katz. It applies to former federal employees. So part of the definition would be that there was a separation of service, not simply that they received the notice. You would have to show the notice as part of the application to prove that you
I
qualify.
appreciate it, but if it's in court, if the courts say, look, we're putting this on hold, does that put that notice on hold?
Right. If they're subject to a court case in which there's a court order saying, no, you're not really fired, you are still a federal employee while this is playing out, they would not qualify for this preference.
And I guess, and we can get back to what you originally asked, Madam Chair, but and this is only for people who actually worked for the federal government. It's not contracts, right? Contract employees?
Correct, it is not.
And could we cover contract employees?
In theory, yes, we could do an amendment to do that. I'm sure OHR has thoughts about that. I think that would, certainly complicate the administration of it and greatly increase the pool of potentially eligible persons.
Before we get to that,
Okay.
Councilmember Katz, I know Council Vice President Jawando had his hand up. Did you want to speak to the back and forth we just had?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. And I appreciated, Councilmember Katz, your question. One of the changes was, and it's always, these brackets are always tough to look at, but Ms. Wellens cleared it up that you would have to actually be separated. That would be submitted because we were balancing the administrability of it, but also just the workload, and also not wanting to have a very long verification process. So wanted to create that line to make it brighter. I know, for example, though, that even now there are federal workers that have been separated, even if that date has, if there's a court case and that they get their job back or whatever, even if you've applied now for this bill, you could be in that category and you're gonna have to make a decision of, do I take the job or not? And so I still think that this will work in that we created a bright line and that you have to have actually been separated at a date certain. So I appreciate OHR for that clarification. And just on your point of the contractors, we did consider that. We obviously are concerned about that. That's harder, and OHR, I'm sure, will comment, to verify and creates, it's more squishy, and it just would dramatically increase the number. And while we're concerned about them and have a lot going on with Worksource Montgomery and other entities, this was limited to folks who actually were federal civil servants. And so that was the rationale there, but I certainly understand the concern. Thank you, Madam President.
Great. Dr. Whedon, did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to say in caveat to what Councilmember Germano stated, yeah, OHR will need time to reevaluate the process if contractors are considered, as this is a much larger pool of individuals. And like he said, it is hard with the verification process. We would have to get all that established differently. And then I'm going to yield, and any other questions I'm going to have Sam. So.
Perfect. And I just want to clarify, because it's just, as people are, obviously, there's a lot of anxiety around this, and it's a very, it's complicated, given the court cases and everything. And I just want to go back to what was said. So if somebody was a federal employee and got notice that their job was going to end in December of 2025, they would not be eligible to apply until, say, January of 2026. Is that correct? Because it has to be when the separation occurred?
That is correct. Yep. And on December 1st, 2025, they should also be receiving a separate document that officially separates them from the federal government, and that is the document that they would need to submit as part of their application.
Okay. Terrific. Just wanted to be clear about that, because I know there's an awful lot of folks in the county who are just in that grouping. Okay, so the amendment before us is regarding the preference of where we consider a displaced federal worker under subsection K. Any concerns about that, or Councilmember Katz yet?
Yeah, if first off, I have no problem if you, with the listings and how they're done. Is that saying that one listing is a higher preference than another? So if someone is a veteran or a disabled veteran, they would get preference before someone who's a displaced federal worker? Is that what this is saying this way? Is there something in this legislation that says that?
Yeah, yes, Councilmember Katz. Let me see, it might be easiest to turn to the mock-up of the bill. Let me find it for you.
Circle 23.
Right. And if you look at Circle 24, you see under D3, starting line 6, the competitive appointment, and you see that there's a preference system established in the following order of preference, and then it lists each one. So they are in order of, the first preference goes to current, county employees who are no longer able to do their current county work because of a disability or injury, and then it goes down the list. So they are in order of preference, and that's also borne out in the actual personnel regulations.
I missed that one. Thank you. And then the other thing is, what happens if someone has more than one preference? Does that give them a double chance? What does that mean?
Operationally, the highest preference that the individual claims is the preference that we then work through. So they're only afforded one preference in the Montgomery County personnel regulations. Each of these has basically a phrase or clause that says subject to not having a higher preference than the individual would be considered under this preference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, so I'm not seeing any objection. All okay accepting that amendment? All right. That amendment is accepted, and we'll move on to the second one. Ms. Mullins?
Great, thank you. The second potential amendment, and we're on page 4 of the staff memorandum, deals with refining the definition of displaced federal worker. And we've talked about this some already, but there's a couple things going on in this potential amendment. One is that it clarifies the exact notices that OHR would need in order to process the preference, the notice of the personnel action, separating the individual, and the notice that the notification that the reason for the separation is the individual's position is no longer needed, or the individual is subject to a federal reduction in force. The individual would still have to reside in the county, and that it would still have to be a former employee who's actually separated. And then what would be removed was the provision in the original bill stating that the person would have to demonstrate a loss of income. So that administrative burden would no longer be there. The term displaced federal worker would not include individuals who are subject to downgrade or reassignment. In other words, they're still federal employees, just with a different role. Individuals who can receive, this goes to Councilmember Katz's point, individuals who are eligible for a higher preference get that higher preference. And then if the individual is separated for some other reason, they're not, other than your role is no longer needed or you're subject to a reduction in force, individuals separated for a different reason would not qualify under the definition. So that would be that refinement of the definition is the second potential amendment for you.
And Mr. Freshour, I think you touched on this before, but the regs will outline all the different documents that folks will need for this. And then to screen these, the eligibility and screening, all gets done in your office, the Human Resource Office, before people get passed on to the departments, correct? Yeah. All right. Any objections to that amendment? All right. Not seeing any, we'll accept that amendment.
Thank you. We're on page 5 of the staff memorandum, item number 3, and this goes to the required components of the executive regulation or the personnel regulation that will carry this out. To the council president's point, this gives a little more like meat on the bones of what the regulation will include, and specifies that that the individual, the displaced federal worker, would be rated among the highest rating category for the merit system position in a normal competitive process. And OHR is better situated than I have to unpack what that means, but it also obviously would be, spelled out as the other preferences are in the personal regulation itself.
Yeah.
So the draft executive regulations would outline what this looks like a bit more operationally. Essentially, federal workers will still apply via our jobs board for a merit position, and when they identify themselves as a federal worker, they submit the appropriate documentation that would be outlined in the executive regulation, and they do not identify within a higher hiring preference category, then they would be screened to make sure that they meet the minimum qualifications of the position, as is required for all hiring preference categories. And as long as they meet the minimum qualifications, they would automatically be placed into the highest rated category available after those higher ordered hiring preferences.
All right. No objections. We'll adopt that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last potential amendment that's listed in the packet for your consideration, bottom of page 5, item number 4, would relate to the sunset of the bill. As I had mentioned, the original sunset was 1 year after the effective date. OHR can speak to this, but I think they reasonably felt, a date certain would be
More helpful.
Yes, more helpful. And through the talks with the Council Vice President, the July 2nd, 2027 was proposed, and we're happy to try to answer any questions you have about that.
Any?
The background towards a date certain is the system changes that need to occur on our jobs board, as well as the training that needs to occur with our hiring managers that hire these individuals. Mainly the systems, and we have to, in order to change the standard questions on our application forms and not to have a different set of criteria mid-advertisement, we will need to close all of our advertisements, sort of have a blackout day of no jobs available on our jobs board, add this question in, reopen it, and then at the sunset, it's the reverse. We need to close them all out again, remove this question, and then reopen all new advertisements. So giving us a Friday allows us time operationally over the weekend to make those changes in order to not disrupt operational workflows as well as candidate experiences.
I guess this goes to a bigger question that I had as we were looking through it, and I very much appreciate your work on this. And I know we have seen an increase in our applicants from folks who are federal employees. But in terms of the work it's going to take for OHR and making sure that, I think this committee has talked a lot about filling vacancies over the last couple of years. There are, we talked about contractors before, there are a lot of folks out of work, and I think all of us want to help our federal employees. But before we wrap up this last amendment piece, I just wanted to also give you all the opportunity. Is there, any other things that we should consider as we're considering this legislation? Are there things that OHR needs to make sure that not only is this legislation successfully implemented if passed by the full council, but also understanding that we want to make sure that anybody who applies for a job in the county receives up-to-date information, that we don't lose good applicants because things are taking longer. And I just want to take this opportunity to ask you all, is there anything else that we hadn't thought about, we hadn't asked about in your conversations that we could do to improve this and make sure that it's functioning with all the intent that we have for it?
Yes, thank you, President Stewart, for giving that opportunity. So we were able to meet with Council Vice President Jawando and Council staff to discuss the amendments to this bill, and we are appreciative of the changes made, which help to reduce the operational and financial impacts of this legislation. So the amendments as drafted in this packet help to mitigate those costs, and it is important to note that the changes will reduce the anticipated fiscal impact from $312,000 annually to about $125,000 annually. As you are familiar with our lean budget in OHR, once this bill is approved, OHR will be partnering with OMB to submit for that supplemental appropriation request to fund the additional staffing needs to operationalize this bill. And in addition to the proposed changes to the MCPR, OHR will be coming back to this body with that mid-year supplemental appropriation request in order to fund those additional staffing requirements. The operational impact with those additional staffing, we are still looking, again, it's a reduction from the original bill. The original bill's impact operationally was looking at a delay of 3 to 4 weeks added onto the hiring timeline. With the amendments, the delay is reduced. We're anticipating 5 to 15 working days.
Great. Thank you for that. Sorry to derail us from the conversation of that amendment, but I thought that was a good opportunity. And I'm not seeing any objections to the date certain amendment, so that's fine. And that is the last amendment. Unless Council Vice President, did you have anything else to add before we vote on the final bill?
I don't want to get in the way of a yes and just say thank you. Just say thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anything else from my colleagues before? All right, since we have a number of amendments I'll ask for a hand vote. All those in favor of the legislation as amended during the session and a recommendation to full council for passage, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Awesome. Well, thank you all. I really thank you, Council Vice President Jawando. Thank you to our Office of Human Resources, OMB, for all your work on this. I know there's a lot we need to be doing for our community right now, and this is a piece of that moving forward. So very much appreciate it. And we'll get this to full council. Thank you. All right. Our next item, we have, we're welcoming up Mr. Smith, and we have a resolution to adopt the FY 26 to 31 tax-supported fiscal plan summary. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Smith to walk us through this.
All right. Thank you, Council President. Thank you, GO committee members, and I want to also thank our colleagues who from IOM Finance and OMB have joined us for this discussion, not only just for today, but for all their work and how they collaborate with the council during the operating budget and throughout the year for the fiscal plan summary. So the committee has before them the the resolution to approve the tax-supported fiscal plan summary for the fiscal 26 to 31 public service program. Just some quick background for those watching at home who may not be familiar with this document. The charter requires that the executives submit a 6-year public service program with the operating budget each year, and then the council needs to approve that public service program at or about the time they approve the operating budget. In addition, the council has added a further refinement to this process in its fiscal policy resolutions throughout the years, including that the plan needs to be structurally balanced and also needs to detail the county's reserves. And since June 2010, the council has been approving a balanced fiscal plan summary for the 6 years as well as the reserves there. I just want to highlight the fiscal plan summary, as always, is a snapshot in time. It is not immutable. It will be changed. And this one defines and helps to see the details from the council's actions and assumptions during the approval of the fiscal 26 operating budget. It will be updated. This particular version for the fiscal 26 to 31 will be updated twice throughout the next 12 months. The next time the council will see a new plan and the public will see a new plan, or a revised plan, I should say, is in December with the revenue projections that finance will have for fiscal 26 and beyond. And then the final one will be on March 15th with the executive's recommended operating budget for fiscal 27. The council will see again further refinement to the revenues on this fiscal plan summary, as well as projections on estimated expenditures for the agencies. I won't belabor all of the details, but I want to highlight a few for this fiscal plan summary that's before the committee today. The summary includes some assumptions on the bottom of Circle 3, like every fiscal plan summary. I won't detail all those, but I do want to highlight two of them. First, the revenues include the council's final actions on taxes, including the rejection of the executive's proposed property and income tax increases. And so the revenues currently assume no increases there, not only in fiscal 26, but in future fiscal years. However, the summary does not include, as we discussed during the budget, any estimations or projections for impacts based on the federal policies, both to our expenditures and revenues. And so, as noted by finance during the operating budget, at least on the revenue side, it'll be about December, we'll have updated revenue projections based on what the data is showing. So in terms of revenues, the revenue on table 1 on page 3, I've highlighted the annual average growth rate, as well as just the average growth rate over the next 6 years for revenues. That comes out to 3.5% a year. The largest growth is in fiscal 25 to 26, as you can see, and then much more modest growth in our revenues for fiscal 27 through 31. This is typical based on the current projections we have for the economy. And again, as I just noted, it doesn't include any hiccups in the road or bumps based on other things that may come to light as we go through the rest of this year and into next year. For the non-agency commitments, which is the next kind of series of expenditures, these are primarily due to fiscal policy decisions such as debt service, PAYGO, and reserves, and OPEB, but these are expenditures that the council approves each year that are outside of the agencies to kind of fund our work. Debt service is continuing to average pretty well and continues to be below our estimated revenue growth. PAYGO is expected to be at the policy level, or exceeds the policy level actually, for a couple fiscal years in this plan. Current revenue is the most mutable one. That one will change each fiscal year, and this is based on the current approved 6-year CIP. And then finally, the county's reserves are highlighted there. And I will say that as estimated during the operating budget, the council has approved close to 11.2% in reserves for fiscal 26 based on the operating budget approved. And this gives more fiscal room to address issues that may come in the current year. The last thing I'll note is then once we net out the expenditures for non-agency use, we have what's left over for all of our agencies. And so, again, similar to the revenues, which kind of define the size of the pie, fiscal 26 is seeing expenditures for agencies grow by 7.3%, but then much more muted throughout the next 5 fiscal years in this plan. In fact, in fiscal 27, there's only a 1% growth in agency use that's expected based on current growth in revenues, or about $61.6 million to fund existing programs or any new services. Of course, that number will change as we get closer to fiscal 27, but the council staff wanted to at least highlight that is a very different number than what we have currently for the fiscal 26 approved operating budget. And as noted in Table 2 at the very end of the packet, growth for agency use is definitely less than what is in fiscal 26. Ultimately, the committee will need to decide today to make a recommendation for full council for approval. Council staff recommends approval because this plan is based on the council's actions they took on May 22nd this year. And I will turn it over for questions that the committee may have.
Great. I just first want to see if anyone from OMB Finance, if you all have any questions. Nice to see you on the other side of budget. Appreciate it. Hope you got some rest. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Katz first.
Thank you, and I too want to say hello and thank Mr. Smith. But the only thing I have is there's a typo on the first. I know. With all these numbers on the first paragraph, you talk about that we approved this on May 22nd, 2026. Now we could go watch Back to the Future, but that's going to be very tough. We approved it on 2025. Okay, and then you later on do say 2025. But other than that, you did.
That he wants to get through next year's budget as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it would save us a lot of time if we could do it that way. But anyhow, other than that, I'm good. Thank you.
Councilmember Friesen.
Appreciate that. Speaking of 2026, I think it was very well articulated by staff, and I just want to reiterate the revenue growth up to this point has been really high. Mm-hmm. We are not projecting the revenue growth to be very high moving forward. And I think it's a thoughtful, it's been a collaborative effort. I really appreciate all the work of the executive branch working with the council. I think the revenue estimating group has been a positive. There's still room for refinement and support, but I move forward with that bill because I thought it was a better practice to have a more collaborative approach on the front end, to have a better product on the back end. But this should be sobering for us. Mm-hmm. If we're looking at, going forward next year, we're going to be approving a budget where the out years we're not at 3% growth most of those out years. And the risk is to the downside, if anything, at this point, particularly given all of the mayhem that's happening on Capitol Hill and with the federal administration. So I just, as we're talking about fiscal issues, as we're talking about fiscal plans, our plan is pretty sober. We have to follow it. And it's sobering to realize that the risk is actually to the downside, if anything. The concerns that all of us have. We just had a conversation about federal workers. Well, that is not a political dynamic. That is a reality for families in our community. If you added on the contractors, which I think all of us, if there was an administrative way to do that, would have liked to do that, that's about 195,000 people in Montgomery County, about 75,000 federal workers. There's 1.5 contractors by most projections to every one federal worker. Well, that's 195,000 people out of a jurisdiction that isn't quite 1.1 million. If you look at just the working age proportion of our population, it is a staggering percentage who are at risk. And that doesn't even include all the people who aren't federal contractors who are impacted by these draconian decisions that are made. The federal building and the people who clean the building, the people who work in the cafe in the building, the restaurants that surround that building. There are so many impacts. So I think it's just really important that we highlight that we focus on it, that it be part of the conversation and should really lead the conversation, because there are some real fiscal challenges that we are heading into, and this chart really speaks to that. And if anything, I'm concerned that the chart, even though I think it's appropriate and it's right at this point, the risk is that we might have to revise it, further moving forward, and it's less likely to be revised significantly up, and it's more likely, unfortunately, that it be revised a bit further down. But I wanted to hear just any thoughts on that and on the sustainability numbers and on where you see this going, particularly in FY 28 through 31. And the last thing, the revenues are a year or two behind the economy, generally. So I just think it's important to know, like, what we're looking at in FY 28 in terms of what the county is likely to capture is what families are experiencing, what businesses are experiencing for the most part at the end of fiscal year 26 for us. Because we don't collect sales tax, we don't collect gas tax, we don't collect point of sales type taxes that are being felt as families and as residents and employees are feeling them on a day-to-day basis. The state is more impacted by that, and they're already starting to feel some of these impacts. So I just think it's important to note, like, we're talking about this almost as if this is where we think the economy is headed. The reality is what happens in FY 26 is for an economy that is gone. It doesn't exist anymore in terms of a revenue standpoint. Those are impacts, essentially that have already happened, decisions that have already been made. Let me turn it over to the executive branch for any thoughts on that.
Thank you. Dennis Hetman, Department of Finance. That was incredibly well summarized. It's precisely the situation that we're in. However, the revenues are based upon relatively stable macroeconomic conditions right now. We got our May distribution for our income tax. It came in slightly better than expected. That's always our goal, to the tune of about $10 million. A lot of the policy and federal actions that are most concerning and that we're disproportionately exposed to in Maryland have been more rhetoric of late. At least the tariffs tensions have subsided a bit. And that probability of the recession, as little as a couple of months ago, J.P. Morgan, the Moody's of the world, had it at about 60%. It's now at about 40%. So we're staying on the pulse of that. It's an always evolving landscape. We're going to get income tax distributions in June, July, August, and then also a new Moody's economic data in September. But we always, in the Department of Finance and OMB, model it and configure it in a way where, given our disproportionate risks, it is formulated on a conservative basis. We're always trying to gently beat as opposed to fall short. And even in that context, I would argue we're aligned on the right side.
Yeah, I agree. I think the work is really good. I think, everything that could be done is being done from the staff perspective, at least. And so I just really appreciate that. I think it's important. But we are, facing a multi-tiered dynamic. We had a conversation with Maryland Association of Counties. The other piece of this is the impacts that the state is going to face and how those impacts are going to impact us, both on a revenue side, but also on a cost burden side, because we don't really have anywhere to shift our cost burdens. We have to cut services, or we have to generate revenue. We don't really have any other choices. The federal government can run up the tab. The state government can pass the buck. The buck stops with local government, with county government. So I really appreciate that. I do think. In some ways, we're better off, but the mood in our type of economy matters as much as anything. Consumer-based economy. There was a George Mason University poll done recently. 20% of residents in the region, not just Montgomery County, in the region, are considering leaving the region. 20%. Now, do I believe that 20% of people are actually going to leave? I don't. We have a great community. We have a great region. There's lots of reasons why people would not want to move. But it speaks to the concern that people have. It speaks to the uncertainty that they have. It speaks to the questions that they have about the future viability in the community, and that makes it less likely they're going to buy a home. It makes it less likely they're going to go out to dinner. It makes it less likely that they're going to spend money in the economy to prop up and support our local businesses. So even if the tariffs have subsided, even if the rhetoric has not necessarily all turned into reality, I think that's a good thing, because some of those rhetoric pieces, if they turned into policy, would be absolutely disastrous. But just the rhetoric being out there, the concern that's been created, has a real impact. The rhetoric is the reality because it impacts consumer behavior, it impacts economic decisions, it impacts revenue. So we could talk about this for a long time. I certainly could. Appreciate the indulgence, but I just think it's really important that we sober ourselves as we have these conversations of what these numbers mean. And when you're dropping from 7.3% in FY26 to 3.5 to 2.6, and then in the mid twos moving forward, it speaks to where this is headed and tough decisions that we're going to have to make. Really tough decisions that we're going to have to make to be on a sustainable path moving forward. So with that, I'll yield back. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Katz. And again, I just want to say thanks, because I think as we were going through our budget process this year, weighing all of these things, as we weighed, do we put in place an income tax increase, what the projections were, we know how difficult that has been for all of you, and we are, waiting for December to see how things are, so we have more data, and I really appreciate that the decisions that we're making here in the county on these issues is really grounded in the data that we have moving forward in the projections that you all do. So appreciate that. Not seeing any objections, we will recommend this to full council for passage. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate you, and we'll see you soon. And with that, the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee is adjourned.